Good afternoon, everyone. So we hope you are all doing good and taking the necessary precautions to keep yourself well in these particular times. Uh, on behalf of CISA, so we first of all welcome you all to the webinar for the RBI master guidelines that are there for the PA and PGs. So in order to give my quick introduction, well, I am Bharat Malik. I lead the business team here at CISA and will be the moderator of this session today. So I'm going to talk about quick facts about CISA, though I know most of the people around there knows it already, but just for the sake of the people who are attending it for the very first time. So we are a forensic-driven cybersecurity firm, and we're working with majority of the financial institutions and having our customer base from 40 plus countries. And the key USP for CISA is we are one of the top 4 global payment forensic investigator, and we have been having an active engagement of that is on year basis, and we have got 2000 plus customers across the globe. So basis the high demand from the industry folks, we have come up with this session today, and obviously it's a hot topic around these days. So as you know that RBI has released detailed guidelines for the payment aggregators and payment gateways to establish a robust governance structure for all the payment intermediaries and ensure mandatory security controls are being followed by the digital payment channels. So people might be thinking like what is there for them while attending this particular webinar. So this webinar would give you the insights on why, how, and what. So why part of it would be like why to get compliant with the RBI guidelines and how to get it compliant, and what if we fail to comply as well. So all these things will be addressed in today's webinar. And I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Mr. Kaushik, for the today's webinar. Kaushik is head of compliance and testing, and he has handled several information security audits at leading banks, payment processors, payment gateways, etc. So some of the housekeeping items before we begin the webinar. So today's webinar is going to be of 45 minutes. So 30 minutes for the webinar and 15 minutes obviously for the Q&A. And all the attendees will be muted automatically. So you guys, if you have got any question, you can probably send it through the Q&A section, which is located below your screen. And this webinar will be recorded and uploaded in the CISA's YouTube channel. I would like to welcome Kaushik now to take over the platform and wish you good luck with the learning. Thank you so much. Kaushik.
Thanks a lot for that, Bharat. And good afternoon to all of you. We hope and wish that all of you are safe and sound in the vicinity of your home premises. On that particular note, let's start today's session on the RBI PA and the PG guidelines. What exactly are these guidelines about, and what exactly are things right in there? So the payment aggregator and the payment gateways, both of these terms are not something which needs a definition as of today. The reason being is that today's market, today's Indian market, has grown substantially from a digital payments perspective. When I say that, okay, it has grown digitally, what exactly do I mean by that? It means that if I take the statistics of, let's say, from 2015, where let's say people who were using the internet, or let's say people who were using the digital channels were just 1250 million. In 2020, they have reached to 1350 million. The mobile phone users have increased from 1000 million to 1200 million, specifically going to internet users and smartphone users. And in all, with respect to the digital payment, with respect to the digital era, what exactly India has seen in the past couple of years, in the past 5 years, we have gone up till the second place in the entire world of the number of people who are actually using the internet for their day-to-day jobs, or let's say for their day-to-day activities. Whether we are surfing over the web for, let's say, any information, any knowledge base, or whether we are just chatting with our friends or chatting with our colleagues as well. So with so much, you can say, introduction, with so much advent of these particular technologies in our household, in our let's say in a live space as well. It is very important for even the regulators such as RBI to make sure that this particular surge of people who are using these particular platforms from the internet and all those things will be using digital payments as well. And that is what we are seeing today. That majority of us are performing our payments via digital technologies rather than going to a shop and buying it, or say buying any of the products or services. And that was the very reason why exactly RBI came up with this PA and the PG guidelines, to control the surge of so many people who are going, or let's say are going ahead and trying to perform payments from an e-commerce platform, from an e-commerce era. So if you'll see the agenda, that's how we have even drafted the agenda as well. So first of all, we'll give you a definition that let's say what exactly is a PA and the PG, how exactly we define it, where we'll also define that, okay, why exactly RBI came up with this PA and the PG guidelines as well. Post which we'll be understanding the payments, that how exactly the payment ecosystem works. Post which we'll be talking about the different annexures which are present inside the RBI PA and the PG guideline. And at the end of the day, we'll be telling you about that how to, let's say, securely architect your infrastructure, how to make sure that you have all the controls in place and you are able to comply with this PA and the PG guidelines. On that particular note, let's start today's session. So let's define first of all what exactly, or let's say who exactly will, let's say, will be defined as a payment aggregator, or let's say who exactly will qualify as a payment aggregator entity. So the payment aggregators are those organizations who are taking part in a particular e-commerce, or let's say in a particular, let's say, online transaction, and they're making sure that once the customer is performing the payments, at that time the funds first of all go to the payment aggregators escrow account, and then from that particular escrow account it goes to the merchant based upon the settlement period or based upon when the transactions or when the goods have been shipped, depending upon the T+1 to T+5 days. So the payment aggregators basically all across us, right? Whichever entities we see today who are working at the back end, who are taking these particular transactions and going and performing on behalf of the customer, majority of them are payment aggregators. Starting, let's say, from a PayU entity to going to a, let's say, Pine Labs, to going to Paytm, to, let's say, BillDesk, majority of these things. Majority of them work as a payment, or let's say in a payment aggregator model, where the funds first of all gets credited to the payment aggregator's escrow account, and then it gets transferred to the merchants. Whereas the payment gateways will just facilitate this particular transaction. They will just take the MID, the merchant ID of a particular merchant, and send it across to the acquiring bank to process the transaction. The let's say the amount as well, the credit as well, might be directly transferred to the merchant's account at its let's say directly, rather than, let's say, going via the PG and the PA and all those things. Now, in Indian ecosystem, in Indian payment ecosystem, majority of these service providers actually follow the payment aggregator model, and majority of us will be following, the majority of our organizations will be following under this PA ecosystem itself. And actually, that is one of the reasons why exactly RBI in their PA and the PG circle, or let's say in these particular guidelines, are enforcing too much stress, or let's say are stressing too much on the PA entities itself. They're talking about the regulation, they're talking about that, okay, what security controls have to be implemented. They're even talking from a governance perspective as well, that what controls they have to be they have to implement at the end of the day. And that is why exactly RBI is trying to make sure that the payment aggregators who are trying to, or let's say who are behaving as a front interface with majority of these e-commerce merchants, are well secure in nature. Why? Because tomorrow, if let's say a particular breach happens, if let's say a particular exfiltration of data happens, then it will impact you and me as a common consumer, as let's say as an end consumer. And RBI is required to make sure that these particular things doesn't happen. However, if we see, let's say a few years back, we'll see that, okay, lots and lots of breaches have happened. Starting from October 2016, when another 3.2 million cards were compromised. Then in an Indian government database breach in early 2018, Another 1.1 billion registered users' data was compromised. January 2019, again 3 million users. In August 2020, 100 million users. And then in April 2021, another 11 crore Indian card data was available on the dark web, which was available to be sold as well. So these types of breaches, these types of different, you can say hackers attempt, intrusions attempt, have actually forced RBI and these types of regulators to make sure that we go in a proactive fashion rather than a reactive fashion. Once, let's say, a particular breach happens, and after that we don't even know that, okay, what to do. Let's be proactive in that particular fashion. Let's secure our systems. And that's why let's say RBI has launched this guidelines on regulations of payment aggregators and the payment gateways. So let's try to understand that, okay, how exactly a payment works first. So I believe that the diagram on the left-hand side, majority of us will be well aware about the same. That is, a particular, let's say, buyer comes, they shop at a merchant. Okay, let me zoom it so that all of you can see it better. Okay. All right. So there's a particular shopper, or let's say a buyer. They go to a particular merchant store. They let's say they enter their card details over there. From the card details, or the card details goes via a payment gateway to an acquiring bank for approval. Or let's say from the acquiring bank, it will go to MasterCard or Visa, and from there it will go to the issuing bank. Issuing bank will of course be the cardholder's bank, and acquiring bank will be the merchant's bank. And all these information is being transmitted via a payment gateway at the end of the day. The point to notice over here is, or the point to note over here is that the entire transaction is being regulated, is being managed by MasterCard, Visa, Mastro, and these particular kind of the payment channels. The reason being, because of course you are doing an international transaction. So at that time, to cross let's say intercontinental, maybe let's say the border flows and things like that, you need the service of MasterCard and Visas of the world, so that you can have a global payment card network channel. Now, if you'll see on the other hand, if we are talking about the local payment channels, right? Now over here, what's happening, we have taken a case of UPI. However, this particular thing will be applicable across as well, where the payer might be interacting directly with the merchant or with, let's say, the payment aggregator as well, who is trying to behave, or let's say trying to behave as a payment collector on behalf of the merchant. So what exactly is happening is that the payer or the customer will be performing a payment on the payment aggregator's web page, or let's say on an iframe as well, which might have been integrated on a merchant's web page. Now from there, the authorization request will go first of all to the payment aggregator's partner bank. Now this is what exactly I was telling you about, that when I have a payment aggregator into scope, at that time I will have the first account, or say the first bank as the payment aggregator's partner bank. The second bank over there will be the merchant's bank, and the third bank over there will be the payers or the issuer's bank. Whereas if I'm talking about the payment gateway, then I'll have only two banks, which is the merchant's bank and the issuer's bank, or let's say as the customer's bank. Okay, so let's move forward. So over here, an authorization request was sent, let's say from the aggregator to let's say their escrow bank, or let's say their escrow account. From there, it goes to the issuer bank via the NPCI, which is the local national switch for let's say India. After that, the response comes, and at the end of the day, the merchant accounts gets credited as well, based upon the settlement cycles and let's say all those things. So what exactly does let's say this particular diagram tells us? This particular diagram tells us that, okay, which all parties are actually involved in the entire transaction process, and where exactly these payment aggregators or these payment gateways of the world fit in. Now, if you'll see a particular, let's say, business model, as I told you, that the payment aggregator will be coming at the, if you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, the image, the last image is where, let's say, the payment aggregator comes into picture, where different merchant IDs from different merchants will be aggregated by that particular payment processor, and then accordingly they will be sharing it across. The reason being is because the payment aggregator will behave as a let's say as a customer for a particular bank directly, and the bank might or might not know that, okay, who exactly is the merchant at the back end. However, in some time we'll understand as well that based upon the RBI PA and the PG guidelines, it is the responsibility of the payment aggregators to go ahead and report the merchants whosoever has been onboarded by the payment aggregator. They can no longer, or let's say it's not allowed as per the RBI guidelines to actually mask the merchants which are actually operating on the payment aggregators platform. So why exactly this payment aggregator and let's say these types of things came into picture? Because of the advancement of the digital payments. As I told you in the very starting, so many internet users we have today. The number of internet users are directly proportional to the number of digital payments which will be performed by these customers, by these end consumers at the end of the day. Now, these particular digital payments are, of course, good for the society, for the business, for the ecosystem, but for you and me as a security professional, it is bad because the risk exposure area is going huge over here, which is bringing a lots and lots of security concern for protecting the user's sensitive data. And that is the very reason why exactly RBI requires organizations such as the payment aggregators and the gateways to have a robust system, create a well-known security framework, and have a top-notch risk management policy so that we ourselves as a payment aggregator and the payment gateway professionals will be proactive in nature and accordingly will be able to protect, let's say, the infrastructure as well at some point in time. Now, how exactly the scope of the RBI PA and the PG looks like? Now, if you'll read through the entire circular of the RBI PA and PG, you will got to know that the entire thing has been broken up into 4 parts. So basically, the first part starts with the guidelines where they are basically referring to that, okay, from where exactly the references have been taken for the entire circular. So if you'll go through it, you will understand that we always refer to, first of all, the Payment Settlement System Act of 2007. And on top of that, we always build all of the circulars, all of the security frameworks and all the guidelines, especially when it comes to the payment security. Now, once you'll go through the guideline, the second part over there goes with the Annexure 1. Now, what exactly is the Annexure 1? Annexure 1 will talk about all the guidelines which are not from cybersecurity perspective, but are very essential so that the payment aggregators and the let's say and their merchants can work together in a very secure fashion. So in the Annexure 1, they do not talk about the security controls which needs to be implemented, but they majorly talk about that, okay, let's say in the case of settlement, in the case of an authorization, in the case of a chargeback or a fraud dispute or things like that, in how much time do you have to respond? Or let's say in how much time you have to create that particular account, debit the account and things like that, which basically goes from T+1 to T+5 days based upon the RBI guidelines. On top of that, they also talks about the governance. They also talk about the involvement of the boards, which we'll see in some time as well, that, okay, what all things are there inside the Annexure 1. So majorly what I'm trying to say is that Annexure 1 is more from a governance perspective, more from a financial perspective, and more from this particular perspective as well, that the payment aggregators and let's say the payment gateways and the merchants, so the payment aggregators and the merchants are not allowed to store the card data as well at the end of the day, because of which the payment aggregators actually, if they are working along with the merchant, or let's say any of the merchant have the let's say a payment aggregator module, or let's say a payment aggregator business which is clubbed in, then they have to separate the payment aggregator, the payment let's say merchant, and maybe the payment gateway business as well, and apply for authorization, or let's say apply for license of the payment aggregator with RBI. And for that, let's say they previously gave the timeline till, I believe, till May or June. Now they have increased it till September or something, where let's say the payment aggregators can go ahead and apply for a new license as well at that particular point in time. And there is a particular capital clause as well inside it with the core, and that, okay, how much money should the core account should have, how much money should the escrow account will have, and all those things. However, one particular thing which they have specifically mentioned is about that, okay, when you are starting your business, you should have at least 15 CR worth of, let's say, money inside the escrow account, is the capital over there. And then accordingly, in the next 3 years or something like that, should go until 25 CRs, 25 crores. Now, and they have strictly mentioned that, let's say, if a particular payment aggregator is not able to maintain this much funds, then they can wrap up their business as well. That's what they have mentioned very, very clearly over there. So that is what Annex 1 talks about. When we come to Annex 2, it talks about all the cybersecurity controls. When I talk about cybersecurity controls, it starts from the, let's say, the IT infrastructure of your organization, the IS security, or let's say the information security policy inside your organization, the access security, the application security, and a hell lot of things. So that is something which we'll discuss once we go to the Annex 2. And then we come to the Annex 3, which talks about the reporting and the periodicity. And if you are looking forward to maintain compliance based upon the P and the PG, then Annex 3 is of much more use to you. So if you will see that, okay, what exactly is the scope and the applicability and how exactly you have to, let's say, report your compliance, then first of all, the majority of the requirements over here from Annex 1 and Annex 2 are actually applicable for the payment aggregators. However, payment gateways can implement and use this as a best practice. Now, it is also applicable for the payment aggregators' domestic leg of import and export related payments as well. However, it's not applicable for, let's say, cash on delivery e-commerce based transactions. So that brings us to our Annex 1. So if you'll see, the Annex 1 over here talks about majority of the things which the payment aggregator will do, but not from, let's say, a cybersecurity perspective, but more from fraud prevention and let's say the risk management framework controls and all. So first of all, in the entire the P and the PG guidelines, RBI is emphasizing much more on the involvement of the board, or let's say of the board of directors and all those things, that the transparency of, let's say, the cybersecurity practices, or let's say the information security policy and things like that, are communicated to the top notch, or let's say are communicated to each and every party inside an organization, or let's say inside let's say the board of committee as well over there. They're also saying that the cybersecurity incidents, whatever is happening, they have to be monitored, handled, and make sure that we perform the RC, root cause analysis as well of the same. And once we go to the Annex 3, over there we'll understand that, let's say, it is a part of the periodicity which the organizations from a merchant and the payment aggregator both have to maintain and report to RBI as well, in the case if they have, let's say, faced any of the cybersecurity incidents inside their organization. They're also well aware, and they are also well documented, that the data storage requirements should follow as per the payment system operators requirement. So if you search on the, let's say, on the RBI website with respect to the resources, you will, let's say, interface with something with the payment system operators, their requirement, their controls, and all those things, with the cross-border transfer, let's say, laws and things like that, and the data storage requirement that, okay, the transactions and everything have to be stored within a server inside India only at all the times. Whereas these guys are also saying that, okay, we have to submit a SAR report, a system audit report, along with the, let's say, a cybersecurity audit as well, by a certain empaneled auditor. And last but not the least is that the ATM pins should not be used as a factor of authentication for card not present in the e-commerce transactions. Now, this has been put across because all of us, or let's say from the PCI domain, understand that the pin always should be entered in, let's say, those devices, or let's say those hardened devices which are basically PCI PTS compliant, or let's say are SRED compliant. So of course your e-commerce is not, which will have huge challenges. That brings us to our poll question 1. Let's see, I think you have 40 seconds to cast your prayer. Please go ahead. Right, so we have the poll results where majority of us are in the process of complying with the guidelines. Around 10% have successfully implemented and 13% need the support as well. Awesome. Let's start with this then. All right. Okay. So we saw that what was the need of these PA and the PG guidelines, what was there for, let's say, the other players as well, what exactly are the basic framework which is required for the merchant, the payment aggregators, and majority of them are, let's say, the best practice for the payment gateways. Now let's start understanding that, okay, what all things the merchant, or let's say what all things a payment aggregator has to maintain when they are onboarding a merchant, or say when they are managing a merchant. So first of all, a board of approved policy has to be there for the merchant onboarding. Now at the time of merchant onboarding, if let's say the merchant is capturing the card data, or let's say processing the card data, at that particular point in time, they might be required to go ahead for a PCI DSS compliance as well. If they are using any application, a payment application that has been sold off the shelf and is taking part in authorization and the settlement of the transaction, then that particular application will be eligible for PCI DSS compliance as well. However, many of you might know this, that PCI DSS compliance, basically yesterday was the last day for the PCI DSS compliance. PCI DSS compliance is no more in perspective. If any of the applications are going ahead for a fresh compliance, they have to go with the S3, which is the secure software standard, which is coming under the SF framework from PCI. Which is more or less similar to, let's say, the PCI DSS with a few, you can say, differences as well. For those of you who need to go through the S3 standard, we have already done a webinar. The recordings are available, and you guys can go ahead and look at the details around that particular thing as well. Okay, so let's go back and let's focus on the payment aggregators. So the PCI and the PCI DSS compliance might be applicable, and the payment aggregators are required to make sure that the merchant whom they are onboarding, if DSS or let's say PCI DSS is actually applicable to them, then they are compliant as well with respect to the same. They have to make sure that the merchant site is not saving the customer card data. They can perform some checks if they want to, or it can be a part of the contractual obligation as well. Accordingly, they have to vet the agreements with the merchants, and they have to get the periodic security assessment reports as well from the merchants as well. Now, what are periodic security assessment reports? If you'll go deeper into these particular standards and guidelines, you'll get to know that, let's say, the internal VA, it needs to be done quarterly. The external VA, or let's say semi-annually, the external VA needs to be done annually. Basically, what they're saying is that the internal activities have to be done at a quarterly or semi-annual basis, whereas the external activity have to be done on an annual basis. That's what, let's say, RBI is saying. And that is something which, let's say, majority of us have to follow as well, if we want to, of course, maintain the compliance based upon the PA and PG guidelines. Now, they're also, the PAs are also required to ensure that the merchant discount rates are followed as well throughout. And these are general instructions which basically revolve around the transactions and doesn't have to relate, or it doesn't have to behave that much from a security perspective. They also say that PAs shall not place any limits on the transaction. That is something which should fall under the purview of the issuer. If the issuer wants to place limits on the transaction, they can do that. But the payment aggregator should not do it at any point in time. And as I told you, the ATM pins should not be used for authentication for any of the card not present transaction. And all the refunds shall be made to the original, let's say, method of payment. Unless, of course, let's say if you have a agreed upon model with the customer, let's say with the merchant, then it can go with the different modes as well. However, as a best practice, or let's say as per the directive, it should be going to the original method of payment at all the times. How about Annex 2? Now, Annex 2 is basically talk about your cybersecurity controls. And these are the cybersecurity controls which organizations have to maintain at the end of the day. So if you'll see all these controls, they are basically focusing first of all on the robust risk management, and something which, let's say, they have emphasized on, again over here, is the forensics angle. So if you see, they start with the information security governance, where they say that you should perform a thorough risk assessment, the risk management across the organization. I know that, okay, the risk assessment is also one of the controls which they want, but even then the information security governance as well, they have again focused on a robust risk management framework. And on top of that, they are saying that organizations should make sure that their people, processes, technology, each and everything is covered as a part of their information security governance at the end of the day. Then they talk about the data security standards. Inside data security standards, they have mentioned typically PCI DSS and PADSS, depending upon the applicability to the organizations. Accordingly, organizations have to make sure that, okay, they follow the same. Then they talk about the security incident reporting, the merchant onboarding practices, the cyber security audit reports, the information security, the IT governance as well. And again, you will see over here, they're saying the board has to be involved again, when I'm talking about the IT governance practices, along with the IT steering committee, enterprise information model, and cyber crisis management plan. So if you see the left-hand side, majority of these things, actually you might be following if you are complying with any of the either PCI DSS or the ISO, or let's say majority of the standards which you are following. It's just that the scope of this digital payment has to coincide and has to make sure that, okay, all the digital payments what you are doing from an e-commerce perspective are following under this particular manner. A few of the things which are on your right hand side might or might not be followed as a part of your PCI or let's say any other compliance, which starts with first of all an enterprise data dictionary, so that whichever data is present inside your company, inside your organization, you should know the usability of the same. You should know the criticality of the same. So that accordingly, that particular data might be coming out as an asset, and then accordingly, you have to protect the same. Then they talk about the access to the application, which is basically based upon the role-based access and the least privilege necessary to, let's say, access any of the applications which are taking part in, let's say, this particular payment operations. Along with that, the competency of the staff. So an awareness training, or let's say a rigorous awareness training, is very much required as a part of the P and the PG guidelines. The vendor risk management. Now, many of us are well aware about this vendor risk management. We know that, okay, we always get a vendor security audit checklist where any of, let's say, our customers will give them, will give it to us, and then we have to fill it out, maybe let's say add a few of the evidences or reports on top of that, so that let's say the customer, whosoever, let's say, asks for it, will get a clarity that yes, we are following all of these security practices. So the vendor risk management will also play a very crucial role, along with the maturity and the roadmap. Cryptographic requirements. So in the cryptographic requirements, they are saying that, okay, you have to follow the industry best practices, the industry best standards. And how exactly we can do that? Just refer to the NIST, the SANS, and let's say things like that. And they tell you that which all algorithms have been broken, which all algorithms are still secure, and which all algorithms can be used as well. So that's what the cryptographic requirement talks about. The forensics readiness. Now over here, they are following let's say a mixed approach. In forensic readiness, they are talking about that each and every, let's say, cybersecurity event, if it's occurring, you should perform a root cause analysis. You should make sure that, okay, a forensics readiness assessment is also being done at that particular point in time, so that an organization can make sure that a malware hasn't entered their premises. Now, typically what organizations are doing for this is that they are implementing, let's say, an MDR solution, or let's say a forensic detection and response solution, something like that, and having a forensics retainership as well with any of the forensic vendors, so that organizations are secure and let's say they do not go into any of the nitty-gritties at the end of the day. Data sovereignty, where they have to make sure about the cross-border transfer flows and what will data they are storing, and they should not be storing anything outside, and of course the foreign data is being not stored. Then data security and outsourcing. Now, for those of you who are well aware about the RBI practices, you might know that for outsourcing, RBI has a different circular altogether, which was, I think, launched 2005 or 6, something like that. And over there, they have typically mentioned that which all component, which all services can be outsourced as well to a service provider, and which all services has to be, let's say, considered inside a bank or inside a financial institution itself at all the times. And then they talk about the payment application security, which revolves around the PADS and the S3. And how exactly you will be, let's say, showcasing that yes, you are maintaining the compliance with respect to all the cybersecurity controls. You have to submit a SAR report, which is the system audit report, by a certain impanel auditor within 2 months of financial closure. Now, this particular 2 months of financial closures will be 31st May. So 31st May of every year, you are required to actually submit these particular report as well. And that is what you will see in the Annex 3 as well, which once we go over there. The applicable compliances, certain, you have to do every year, as I told you. PCI SSC, there is a PCI DSS and PA DSS S3, depending upon the applicability. The PA has to do, and they have to make sure that even the merchant is doing it. The internal audit, the IS and the IT audit is something which you have to do. ISO 27001 and COBIT are not a mandate, but as RBI is, let's say, focusing too much on the governance practices, then it will be worthwhile to actually go ahead and invest and let's say follow the 27001 and the COBIT practices as well at the end of the day. So the Annex 3 is all about the reports which has to be submitted. So if you'll see, annually, organizations are required to submit the net worth certificate, which you'll be getting from a CA, which is a chartered accountant, and the IS audit report as well, along with the cybersecurity audit report. Then let's say from a quarterly perspective, you will be getting the auditor certificate maintenance of balance in escrow account. That is again a financial practice, and the banker certificate as well on escrow account debits. Statistics of transactions which have been handled. You should be let's say submitting it monthly. Declaration undertaking by the director means, let's say, if there are any changes or if there's anything which is going on, if the let's say there's an acquisition or whatever the case might be, then it has to be done on a non-periodic basis. It means that as soon as, let's say, this particular thing happens, then between 10 to 30 days from there, you have to basically submit this particular report. Report on compliance with para 3.6. So para 3.6 of the PA and the PG guidelines actually talk about many different things, and they basically talk about that, okay, if you are not able to maintain the compliances, then either let's say you should just wrap up your business and go, or otherwise apply for the let's say the PA licensing as well. On top of that, if you have to let's say maintain the entire let's say the PA business inside your organization. And then the cybersecurity incident reports have to be again non-periodic. If let's say if there is a cybersecurity incident which has happened, let's say in this particular month, then the maximum timeline which has been given for that is 7th of the next month. So that is the maximum timeline which has been given by RBI, and accordingly organizations have to comply with the same as well. Now, if let's say you or your organization, and this is the last piece, and after that it will be the Q&A. So if let's say your organization is looking for implementation of cybersecurity controls, then there are 3 levels which you can follow. However, just to let you know, only level 3 will actually help you with compliance. Level 1 and 2 will not, because level 1 is basically for small business, for non-regulated industries, which have less than antivirus and a firewall itself and nothing else. However, all of us know that this particular thing will not help any organization whatsoever. When we go to level 2, we see that, okay, we have an information security specialist, I have a security strategy, email security is there, IDS, IPS in there, and of course, and antivirus is also there. But is it sufficing all the requirements of cybersecurity? No, it isn't. And that's where the level 3 comes, where I have to make sure that quarterly vulnerability assessment is followed along with the penetration testing activities. The threat monitoring is perspective, incident response is in perspective, SIM solution, DLP software, antivirus, you have management servers, and BIODs. Each and every cybersecurity practice, what exactly Annex 2 talks about, should be there inside your infrastructure, so that accordingly you can maintain a robust you can say architecture inside your organization itself. Can we skip the poll question 2, because I believe we are short in time? So let's go ahead. Okay, let's go to the Q&A rather than the poll question. So before you guys can go ahead and drop your questions on the chat box, or let's say on the Q&A section. However, one particular thing which might help organizations in achieving this RBI PA and the PG, and along with the same lines, different payment security directives, will be the risk assessment tool. Now, a risk assessment tool will make sure that the automation of the threats, the vulnerabilities, as and when it's arising, it will be mapped to your organization, mapped to your asset, and accordingly you can remediate the same. That's why an automated RA tool will be of much use, and CISA also offers one of the let's say leading RA tools, which basically, or let's say, which primarily focuses on payment security space itself. On that particular note, let's start taking questions. I believe we have questions.
Thank you, Kaushik, for insightful session. We have a lot of questions to answer. So, meanwhile, Divya, you can launch the second poll. And so, the first question from Ramesh Kumar: what must be implemented, bare minimum and full, to meet CCMP control? And can we complete CSOC with the help of just SIEM and FEAM tools?
Okay, so RBI hasn't defined that, okay, these are the minimum or the maximum which has to be there. RBI, as I told you in the Annex 2, they have given all of these controls, and they have said that, okay, you have to maintain these particular controls as well inside your organization. And they have given you, let's say, timeline, and they have said that, okay, by let's say by this particular year, by this particular fiscal year and all, you have to maintain all the compliances. That's what RBI is saying. So we, as a, let's say, a certain empire auditor, we as an assessor cannot comment on it. However, let's say how exactly the world goes is that they first of all make sure that all of the critical asset is actually secured. All of the, let's say, the merchants which you are onboarding, let's say starting from now onwards, are following all the best practices. You are doing the proper vetting and things like that, so that at some point in time, if let's say you get audited or anything, then you can show that yes, what exactly roadmap you have as of now. However, RBI is requesting for full compliance. RBI is not saying that, okay, you can be partially compliant or things like that. And they are saying that, okay, you have to submit the, let's say, the audit report, you have to submit the certain audit report and things like that with respect to the same. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushik. Second question: how we can use safeguard feature, as card storage is not allowed and RPG is allowed to store card number?
Okay, so it's not written in the RBI circular that PGs are allowed or not, but they have specifically mentioned that the PAs and the merchants are not allowed. That is particular thing they have specifically mentioned over here. So the PGs are allowed or not, that is again a gray area which hasn't been addressed based upon the RBI regulations. However, PA and the merchants are not allowed to store the card data.
Thank you, Kaushik. We have a question from Mahesh: can PA store the card data? I think we have answered this. Why do merchants need to go through PCI DSS / PA DSS if they do not store credit card information? The regulation also mandates them not to store. Isn't it contradicting?
Okay, so PCI DSS is not just applicable to those entities who are storing the data, or let's say who are storing the card data, but it's also applicable to the entities who are processing and or transmitting the card data only. Means it might be possible that you are a merchant and you are taking the card data on your own web page, or let's say on your own application, and then you are transmitting it to a payment aggregator by not storing it at all, by not storing it in any of the let's say phases, or let's say any of the flow basis. Even in that particular case, PCI DSS will be applicable to you at that particular time, because it's applicable to storing or processing, or let's say storing and or processing and or transmitting of the card data. That's the first thing. Secondly, at many of the times, regulated entities, or let's say banks, have also come across and said that even if you are let's say rerouting a particular customer which has come, let's say you are a merchant and you are doing a URL redirect, and then they are going to a third-party payment gateway, or let's say a third-party payment aggregator to perform the payment. Even at that time as well, you should be performing PCI compliance for let's say a certain set of requirements which are basically mentioned as well. If you want to go ahead and see the applicability of requirements, you can go and see the SAQA. That will give you the applicability of the compliances as well, that what all requirements will be applicable to you. So coming back to the point, so if let's say those requirements are applicable, then you should maintain and make sure that yes, let's say those requirements you are able to adhere, for the simple reason because the end consumer is, let's say, trusting you as a merchant, and then accordingly they are getting routed to a third party website. So it's your, or let's say it's merchant's responsibility as well to make sure that the entire payment ecosystem in which your customer is entering their card data is secure. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Kaushik. We have question from Ramesh. Annex 1 10.3 says incident must be reported immediately to the DPSS RBI, while Annex 3 says incident reports should be reported by 7th of next month of the incident month. Your comment?
Yeah. So basically, what I'll say is that based upon the Annex 3, they have, let's say, given the periodicity, whereas in Annex 1, they haven't given such periodicity. They have mentioned immediately. However, they haven't defined what is immediately itself. So what I'll suggest to the customers, and what exactly we are suggesting as well to our customers, is that if it's a major security incident, a major breach, then you should report it immediately to RBI and any other let's say governing body as well, if let's say any of the banks or let's say any of the other third parties are actually governing you. However, if it's a small incident, then you can wait till the 7th of the next month to report the same. Ashwini.
Thank you, Kaushik. Will KYC, AML, CFT, and customer dispute, etc., be covered in my cybersecurity audit as per the regulation, or do I need to hire another company?
Okay, as per this RBI P and PG, no. But as a part of your UIDAI audit and AUA audit and all those things, yes, the KYC document, the Aadhaar data and everything will be coming under that particular purview of, let's say, the transactions as well. So even over there as well, majority of the times is the SAR report only. This is the system audit report, which has to be given. So primarily what I'll suggest to you is that you can accumulate all of the different compliance which you have to maintain actually at the end of the year from the RBI perspective, combine all the standards, do one time majority of things and get compliant. Ashwini.
Yep, thank you, Kaushik. We'll take the last question since we are of the time. Can an aggregator route transaction via aggregator? Will this violate any RBI norms?
Okay. So aggregator, routing it via aggregator, it's not mentioned basically over here. However, as per the current, let's say, practices, it might not violate, because right now what exactly RBI is trying to focus is that the relationship between the merchant and the payment aggregator, and what will control the payment aggregator has to maintain and what will control the merchant has to maintain. So this is the flow which RBI is trying to focus upon. After payment aggregator, what all things are going on, how exactly is their relationship with the bank, that particular thing has been only addressed based upon the escrow account and things like that, which doesn't add that much value. So I believe that if you are able to solve the escrow account challenges, if you are able to solve that, let's say how exactly you will be reporting that which all merchants you will have to the bank directly and all those things, then it shouldn't be an issue. However, it will be a time-taking activity, and it will take a hell lot of time as well from your end basically to be implemented. Ashwini.
Thank you, Kaushik. And let's take one last question. Are these guidelines from RBI applicable to merchants like Amazon, Flipkart? Because we have seen e-commerce platforms like these save credit debit card details on customers on their platforms.
Yeah, so basically, yes, it's applicable. And let's say we cannot comment on any of the compliance status as such. However, there is still time for them to, let's say, implement and enforce. So till the time, let's say they haven't submitted this, or let's say their payment aggregator hasn't submitted this certain impanel report, till the time they can do a few things here and there. However, once they have submitted, once they have shown that yes, they are compliant, after that they cannot.
Thank you, Kaushik. We are just over by the time, and there are many questions which unanswered questions will be reaching you through email, and probably Divya from our team would be sharing handouts as well. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Kaushik. Thank you for joining us. We wish you a great Friday and a happy weekend. Thank you.